At 88 years old, Carroll Shelby is a living legend in the automotive world. For more than half a century, his name has been synonymous with success, and now he's finishing out his storied career back home with Ford. His latest project, the 2012 GT350, could be the greatest Mustang ever created. On today's episode of King of the Road, Carroll is once again putting his reputation on the line by challenging a handful of the world's fastest cars to a time attack around Las Vegas Motor Speedway's interior road course. Each competitor will run the course to lay down their best time, and only when the exotics have finished will the GT350 hit the track. While he knows the new GT350 is a powerful package, only time will tell if it can stack up against cars that cost 2 to 3 times the new Shelby Mustang. Carroll Shelby has spent a lifetime taking on the best automotive manufacturers in the world and has always found a way to come out on top.
Big Eye Kofa said, maybe we better give this nutcase $25,000 before he bites somebody.
In the nearly 50 years since, he's used this championship DNA to build some of the finest American performance and racing cars and cement his place in history as the one and only King of the Road. Carroll Shelby is a portrait of the American dream. After coming back from World War II, he began to realize his dream of becoming a race car driver in the burgeoning sports car scene in Southern California. His good old boy demeanor often shrouded his passion and intelligence, but people weren't fooled by his overalls. He was a smart, fast driver that would find a way to win.
People started asking me to drive their cars. 3 years later, I was driving for Aston Martin in England.
He was courted by Ferrari, but landed at Aston Martin, where he would win Le Mans in 1959.
In the late 50s, Shelby knew he had a heart condition. The doctor said, you gotta stop racing. You're gonna die in a race car, you're gonna kill yourself and a bunch of people.
Had he not developed heart trouble in the late 50s, his racing career would have gone on a lot longer than it did. I suspect when he ended it, I believe about 1960 at Laguna Seca Raceway. Very talented sports car racer, and would have gone on to further and greater things even than his World Championship and 1959 Le Mans win.
But luckily for Carroll, his real story was just about to begin.
All the time that I was racing, I enjoyed driving race cars, but it was the idea of building my own car that fascinated me.
In a fit of genius, he was able to combine his love of American hot rods with his passion for racing small European sports cars to create the ultimate automotive masterpiece, the Shelby Cobra.
Shelby wasn't reinventing the wheel, but it was a confluence of interest.
The family who owned AC had a cute little car called the AC Ace that was looking for an engine, and Ford had a new, fairly lightweight, high-revving, small-block V8 engine that was looking for cars. So he had the idea of mating the two.
With the help of Lee Iacocca, AC cars, and a handful of Southern California hot rodders led by Dean Moon, the Shelby legend was born.
That it was really a cool, fun car for the public to see helped a lot. But then it went out and beat cars like Ferrari and Corvette. The public was suddenly more aware and said, wow, this car not only looks neat, but it really goes. And having a few racing credentials in your background really helps.
The Cobra was a dominant force on the racetrack, but Ferrari was still the team to beat when it came to world-class events like the 24 Hours of Le Mans.
Ferrari was king of the world. There was no one that made a car like Ferrari, you know? Ferrari was fast. Ferrari epitomized sports cars. And Ford wanted some of that. And so Henry Ford, the Deuce, offered to buy Ferrari. And it's been said that Ford's accountants went to Italy, and when they started going through the books, Ferrari couldn't handle Ford's accountants poking through Commendatori's books. You know, I mean, who do these people think they are? And threw them out of the office, called off the deal with Ford, just called it off, said, I'm not doing it. The Deuce went nuts. Zeus said, if I can't own you, I'm going to beat you. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to beat you.
Well, Carroll Shelby and Henry Ford were the perfect match. Henry Ford had been jilted by Enzo Ferrari. Carroll Shelby had no love for Ferrari. And you put Shelby together with the Ford family, and it was the perfect storm. They were out for Ferrari. And the Ferrari-Ford wars were on.
You look at what Ford was doing to beat Ferrari. They were making the GT40. GT40 was not a high production car, but it was a very high prestige car.
The Ford GT was the company's flagship racer, and although it did not win Le Mans in 1965, it still captured the hearts and minds of the American public. In 1966, Ford and Shelby would take the top 3 spots at Le Mans, finally beating Ferrari. It was a big win for all involved and helped to solidify Ford's performance image on the track. Ford would continue to reign at Le Mans by coming in first in 1967, 68, and 69.
America loved the idea that Ford beat Ferrari at Le Mans. They loved it, and I think it gave Ford a new respect. Little Ford, they used to make Model Ts for all those years, now had won Le Mans. With American engine car, designed by Americans, built by American manufacturer, it was a matter of national pride.
Outside of racing, Ford's VP and General Manager Lee Iacocca was looking for a car that would ignite sales and get back to the kind of market share they had with the Model A. In 1964, they already had an entry-level sedan with the Falcon, so they decided to create a new class of car they dubbed the Pony Car. Smaller than a muscle car, but sportier than the Econo box it was built on, the Mustang was born. The first generation had 3 available body styles. The notchback was the entry-level Mustang, and it's what the convertible model was built on. In 1965, a sportier fastback was made available, but it was still priced well within the reach of the general public.
Well, Lee Iacocca was a pretty smart guy. He really helped a lot with the birth of the original Mustang, but he also knew keenly right away that to keep that, that big momentum going that they started in April 1764 was to increase its performance image.
The Mustang was always an affordable car. It was always a car of the people.
There's always a question whether the Mustang is a sports car or a muscle car or a compact car. And it's everything.
But it was still very approachable, that moms and grandmas wouldn't be afraid to drive, not too racy, not too sporty. The underpinnings of a solid car.
It's great when it first came out, but you had to keep interest high. And not only did Ford want to keep interest in the Mustang high, they realized that was a car that really had some potential, given the right input from the right individual.
As Carroll Shelby likes to put it, one day Iacocca called him and said, "I'm helping you out a lot with these Cobras, Shelby, so let's see what we can do with that Mustang."
Shelby and Ford had already established a winning relationship after dominating racing with the world-beating Cobra.
Shelby could do no wrong. I mean, everything he stepped into turned out to be a pile of gold. And when Iacocca built the Mustang, he went to Shelby and said, "We need a performance image for the car."
I said, "Lee, you can't make a mule outrun a racehorse. Let's stick with what we're doing." And he said, "Well, I might have to make that a requirement instead of a request." Put a budget together, $15,000 for 2 prototypes. The bean counters got a hold of it and said I had $1,500. I had to run around to Goodyear and everybody else and hustle to build the first Mustang.
So Shelby went and researched where the best place to race the car was. And he decided that the best place to race that car was in the SCCA, the Sports Car Club of America. And because of the size of the engine and the approximate weight of the car, he was destined to race in B production.
The Sports Car Club of America is what ruled road racing in America in the 1960s. Shelby called the folks at the SCCA and said, "What can I do to the Mustang?" So there were various conversations about what would be legal within the B production class rules and what would make the Mustang into a sport car, as he liked to call it.
And so the SCCA gave him the ability to change either the suspension or the motor. Couldn't do both.
Carroll Shelby would need to find a way to make the car competitive without losing the essence of the Mustang underneath. Up next, Carroll Shelby takes on the SCCA B production class.
So in effect, Shelby had beat the rules of the SCCA.
And forces the Mustang down a path of performance that forever alters the brand. Later on,
It is built to be able to withstand the punishment.
he'll take his latest creation to the Las Vegas Motor Speedway to test it against some of the fastest production cars in the world to see if the Shelby magic still works all these years later. The Ford Mustang was an instant success, selling 1 million cars in the first 18 months. In order to continue this incredible momentum, Lee Iacocca decided to create a performance image for Ford's new Mustang. Based on his proven track record, Carroll Shelby was tasked with turning the humble grocery getter into a full-blown race car. To do this, Shelby decided to race it in the B production class of the SCCA. To keep the cars as close to stock as possible, the SCCA told Shelby he could only change either the engine or the suspension. So Shelby set out to find the most powerful Mustang in the lineup to begin his transformation.
That car, called the K car, is the one that was delivered to Shelby without the hood, without certain things on it. And there's a very famous picture of hundreds of Ford Mustangs, all white, no stripes, waiting for their turn in line to be born as a GT350.
Hired Chuck Cantwell. He put the first one together. Ken Miles took it out to Riverside, and it took about 10,000 miles of development by Ken.
In order to efficiently attack the road courses of the B production class, Shelby put the bulk of his research and development into modifying the Mustang to handle like a race car. Shelby's team redesigned the entire steering geometry of the Mustang by adding Coney shocks, lowering the A-arms, adding wider Krager wheels, a quick ratio steering rack, and fabricating strut tower braces to reduce flex. He removed the back seat for the SCCA rules and then continued lightening the car by replacing the hood with a fiberglass version and removing the radio. The SCCA allowed Shelby a few hot rod tricks to the engine, so thanks to a 4-barrel Holly carb and some other tweaks, he increased horsepower from 271 to 306.
So in effect, Shelby had beat the rules of the SCCA. He modified the motor and the suspension. So 65 GT350 was built to create a performance image for Ford.
The GT350 was the ultimate street car, but even that wasn't enough for Shelby to take it to the track. So he created a full race version.
In fact, they made the R model, which was basically a 65. They just took all the weight out of it, put a bigger gas tank into it, and changed the dash, changed the front apron, and put it on the track and won races.
In relatively short order, Carroll Shelby had succeeded in transforming the Mustang into a B production race car. Thanks to a gentle push from Lee Iacocca, Shelby had stumbled on to another winning formula. All he had to do now was prove its worth out on the racetrack. But before he could race it, he had to name it.
No one could figure out what to call this new Mustang. The car was finally supposed to be released,
There wasn't one person that realized that a car makes a name doesn't make a car. About 12 times they sent some people out. What are we going to call this car? What are we going to call this car? I asked one of the guys working there, I said, how far is that building over there? He says, what the hell are you talking about? I said, tell me how many steps it is, that building over there where we were going in Colby. He came back and said 348 steps. I said, right, we'll call it the GT350, and you guys can go back to Detroit now.
Although it was their flagship Mustang at the time, it was determined by Ford that the new GT350 would be rebranded as a Shelby car.
Ford told us to take Ford off of it. They were not the manufacturer of the car. What most people don't realize is Shelby American manufactured the car. I owned 100% of the stock, and I'm the guy that had to go to the courthouse all the time when we get sued, when somebody would do something stupid and kill themselves or injure themselves. But that's the way Icoca wanted it put together.
The title to that car is the Shelby GT350. So he managed to brand a car.
We got more recognition probably than any other little company ever got in the world. Up to that time.
It won B production in 65, 66, 67. It was king.
But understand who was in B production at the time. The Jaguar XKE, 6-cylinder, straight inline, 265 horsepower, independent rear suspension, 4-wheel disc brakes, and this car kicked its butt. It did it with the Corvettes, it did it with Austin Healey's. It's kind of miraculous. I think that's what makes up part of this Shelby mystique, is he did stuff that shouldn't have been able to have been done.
The most important component to the worldwide recognition of Shelby's brand was his ability to win. Beating Chevy's Corvette in 1965 was an undeniable milestone for the GT350. Having been out for more than a decade, the Corvette was already well established as America's sports car. And after falling to the GT350, Shelby had proved there was a new king in town. 45 years later, it was the same reason that Carroll made sure to bring the current model Corvette, the Z06, out to Las Vegas Motor Speedway to run it up against his new GT350. Upon completion of the new GT350, Shelby challenged his team to run it on a road course, time attack against some stiff competition, and document it for the world to see. Later on, he'll run the new GT350, but to increase the pressure on his team, he's going to let the competitors go first. C.J. Hutchins has been racing off-road for 10 years, but today brought out his Z06 that comes stock with 505 horsepower and 470 foot-pounds of torque. It has a huge 7-liter engine that propels the Vet from 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds and does the quarter mile in 11.7. It has a top speed of 198 and pull a neck-snapping 1.04 G on the skid pad. Today, the Z06 completed the course in just over a minute, laying down an impressive baseline for the other cars to follow. Later on, we'll see how the new GT350 stacks up against the Vet and a few other high-dollar exotics. Carroll Shelby wasted no time in putting the GT350 on the podium, dominating the SCCA B production class his first year out. What this meant to him was another challenge met, but to Ford it translated directly to sales.
If you were a car guy or a car kid in the 60s, racing really mattered. It was really important. And guys like Carroll Shelby and Phil Hill and Dan Gurney and Mario Andretti, those were godlike figures to us. If you were into cars back then, you knew who those guys were, and you watched them race and you followed the races. And it was really important maybe because the cars that they raced back in the day, GT350s and Cobras, had such a greater connection to a street car that you could buy back then, or at least cars you saw in the showroom floor. One of the great cliches about motorsport is you win on Sunday and you sell on Monday. So the big manufacturer's impetus here was obviously to get news and PR. Ford wins Le Mans, Ford beats Ferrari, Ford wins Daytona. And there's no doubt that a lot of those big victories sold a lot of cars the following week. It was very important. Those racetrack wins were hard fought, hard earned, hard won, and very expensive. People associated race wins with automotive greatness.
Shelby ended up racing the B production class, SCCA racing, got a name for itself really, really quickly, and got the attention of a whole lot of people, including the ad department, that was able to take these successes and parlay them into additional sales.
The 65 Mustang came out. You could buy a 6-cylinder stick shift, stripped down, $1,400, $1,500, $1,600, $1,700. But then to get a Shelby Mustang on top of that, you were up into the $5,000. That's a couple $1,000s more. That was real money back then. So it took a leap of faith and a real love of Shelby and a love of performance to get you to the list price. And the 65, that was real tough because it was a hard-driving race car for the street.
After the huge success of the 1965 GT350, Shelby realized he'd created a car people wanted to drive every day. So in 1966, the GT350 became more of a street car than a race car. There were more accessories available, and the R designation was dropped. He also crafted a partnership with Hertz that would enable everyone to drive a Shelby.
It's a nice fantasy today to think that we could walk into a dealer and rent a Shelby Mustang for the weekend, drive it around, have a couple of exciting experiences, and bring it back. Well, what most of these guys did is they rented the cars, they took them to the track on the weekend, they hammered them, they wrang them out, and then they brought them back a little looser than when they got to Hertz.
Carroll said he got a call one time from Hertz, and Hertz said, we need another motor for one of the Hertz cars because we realized that they had rented the car, swapped the motors, and we never really figured out who did it.
It was between the accessible Hertz program and the GT350's unprecedented racing success that led Shelby to sell more cars than he ever thought possible. In 1965, 562 cars were built, and then in 1966, he quadrupled his output to over 2,300. But just a few years later, American emission laws began to crack down on powerful cars by restricting the intake and exhaust. And Shelby could see that the writing was on the wall.
It began coming to the end in 67 when we started putting all that crap that goes out the exhaust pipe back down in the crankcase.
Ford wanted to do more and more of the car and control the program, and it was easier for him to just, license the name for a couple of years, let them do those kind of things, get on with their business. And by the way, I think he wanted to go big game hunting in Africa.
The doctors told me in 1960 that I had less than 5 years to live, and my heart kept getting worse and worse.
So if you don't have very long to live, you better get your bucket list done.
And he packed up and he moved to Africa.
And it took the automobile industry 35 years before electronics took over and made things work like the government mandate said they should. And now you're getting better cars than ever were built in the 60s right off the assembly line. Cars that did a lot more than they did back then as far as stopping, turning, accelerating, quietness, all the good things that you request in a car. There are a lot better cars now because of that 35 years.
At the age of 44, Shelby left his partnership with Ford with the idea that he might only live another few years. He decided to travel and spent more than a decade involved in various businesses in the U.S. and in Africa to varying degrees of success.
You got to do things that you're not sure that you can do. You got to stick your neck out and just see if it's possible to accomplish something that everybody else says you can't. I've had more failures than I ever had successes in my lifetime, and some of the failures have been more fun than some of the successes.
Shelby's successes finally came full circle in 2005 when Ford released the new retro-inspired Mustang, and the flame between Shelby and Ford was once again ignited.
Carroll always really wanted to be back with Ford because it's kind of really where he started, really what made the history, and loves being involved with Ford Motor Company.
He's a huge, important part of the family, and in some ways you could say he's the grandfather. He's the one guy who's been around Mustang ever since it started.
When we saw the new body style in 2005, we thought, man, this is cool. We went to Ford Motor Company. We presented them with numerous ideas, and one of those ideas was actually to do a rental car again. In 1966, they did 1,000 cars with Hertz, called them GT350Hs. So we thought that'd be a pretty cool idea.
So they got together with Hertz, came out with a new Shelby GTH, built 500 of them to put into Hertz rental fleets.
And we showed up at the Ford Design Studio in February of 2006. We really made the Shelby GTH a lot like the car that was GT350H. We made it breathe better with cold air intake, calibration, better exhaust, so it had a killer sound with the aggressive suspension that was on it.
You got to remember, this came out before the first Ford Shelby GT500 of modern day, which was the 07 GT500. And that was really the first, reintroduction, if you will, of that series.
I used to get emails with guys with the shoe polish on the windshield. Hey, just went 1394 at 100 miles an hour. Pretty cool for a rental car in 2006.
After the black and gold Hertz cars took the road once again, Shelby and Ford got back together to produce the first Shelby GT and then the GT500. These were packages designed by Ford's SVT division in conjunction with Shelby American and sold to the public through dealers. The GT500 is built around the stout 5.4-liter engine. And when Shelby heard that there was a new 5-liter on the way, he started gearing up to hand-build a new GT350. Though the new 5.0 is surely one of Ford's most advanced engine designs, Shelby has no plans to race the new GT350 professionally. However, it will undoubtedly create rivalries of its own. Today at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, Carroll is looking back to his most talked-about battle by bringing out Ferrari's race-tuned F430 Scuderia. This car represents the golden age of racing and Henry Ford II's most famous personal rivalry with Enzo Ferrari. It was this rivalry that gave Shelby the fire he needed to win Le Mans in 1966 and 67. Even in 2012, Carroll is still interested to see where his cars stack up with Maranello's finest. Mark Risman, an avid club racer and Ferrari enthusiast, brought out his Ferrari F430 Scuderia, the track edition of Ferrari's F430. Light and 220 pounds, the Scuderia pumps out 508 horsepower and has 347 foot-pounds of torque. It does 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds and the quarter mile in 11 flat. But it costs $275,000 if you want to get one. It was able to knock out the 1.1-mile road course in 1 minute, 2.39 seconds, hitting speeds in excess of 113 miles per hour. The Ferrari was not as fast as the Z06. We'll have to wait and see if the new GT350 can beat either one. Ford Ford and Shelby's GT500 program was an instant success, but fans still yearned for a car hand-built at Shelby American. So the two companies once again teamed up to create another Mustang masterpiece.
When we were developing the Shelby GT350, we started working on it on the 4.6. And when we first came out with a 4.6 Mustang GT, it was the top of the horsepower food chain in the sports car segment. It was durable. You could put an awful lot of horsepower in it through forced air, turbo, supercharged, but it didn't have the magic of the displacement, and it was heavier.
Everyone wanted to return to 5 liters. People had wanted it for a long time. There was a big pent-up demand to get to 5 liters.
The new 5-liter Mustang, and they call it the Coyote motor, and it's really a rebirth of the old 5.0.
The 5-liter really made a name for itself in the 1980s and 90s with the old pushrod engine.
All of our Mustang fans loved the 5-liter, wanted it to come back. We brought it back. We brought it back stronger and better than ever. Building from, the technology that we've had in Mustang for quite some time now, but taking it to world-class levels of engineering. I mean, basically producing more horsepower per liter than we've ever produced in an engine before.
When Ford let us in and see the product cycle and the 5-liter came on board, Shelby American knew that they had to wait until the 5-liter came out, which was the 2011 version. It is a higher compression engine. It is a higher horsepower engine. It is more solidly built. It is built to be able to withstand the punishment that performance enthusiasts want to have out of a car, and allows Shelby American to put the stuff on the car from Ford Racing and others that make that car the monster and live up to Carroll's expectations.
The 5-liter engine is a sensational engine, getting over 600 horsepower reliably.
And again, what a perfect platform to take to the next level as a GT350.
Carroll's been really smart about what he's doing with the 5-liter. He's got a great foundation, and what he's doing is supercharging on top of a really robust platform and getting some pretty significant power outputs. With Ford Racing, Whipple, we came up with a supercharger system and cold air intake and 525 or 624 horses in a car that you can live with every day and get 25 miles to the gallon on the highway. What's not to like?
And that's one of the things when we designed the 5-liter, we wanted to make sure that it had future built into it. So we can make it more powerful, we can push it a little bit harder, we can rev it a little bit faster.
I can't tell you the smile on Carroll's face after he drove the 5-liter out here. He just came out and just had this big grin on his face.
In 2010, when Carroll Shelby found out about Ford's new 5-liter Coyote engine, he got the gears turning at Shelby American to build a new GT350. Unlike the GT500 that Ford had already built more than 30,000 of in Michigan, the new GT350 would be kept to only 350 per year, built by hand in the Shelby factory.
The original Shelby GT350 formula from 1965 is really what they're doing now again for the new 2012 GT350. They fiddle with the suspension, they crank up the horsepower a little bit, there's some Shelby identification that goes on, badges and stripes. Most of them are Wimbledon white with blue trim, just like they were back in 1965. It's the same formula, but the recipe has been updated for use today. You look at a new GT350 with loud pipes and Krager wheels, you can relate it to an original 65 GT350 with a loud V8 and Krager wheels.
The design was done by the team in Las Vegas of the Mustang, and it's some retro, but I think it's a damn good looking car.
If you look at the current GT350, you certainly see a lot of the flavors and the passion that the older cars had and the character that the older cars had. So we had a team of people that got together and we played with different designs and we'd all throw our ideas out.
The design of the car was done in-house and pulled cues from the best previous model GT350 from 1965 to 1970. This included a ferocious stance, pronounced hood scoop, and the original white and blue paint scheme.
The grill work, 65, 66 Mustang. The Little Pony, 66 Mustang. I mean, just very clear styling cues. Functionally, it really works well. The design of the whole front fascia and everything really helps keep the nose on the ground, provides ducting for the intercooler for the supercharger up underneath brake ducts for the front brakes. Side rockers have brake ducts in them for the rear. And if you look, we've also got center exit exhaust. Haven't had that in a Shelby since 1970.
We've always said it's got to look like a Shelby, handle like a Shelby. Important, it's got to sound like a Shelby. We do a recorded file of an original 350 and send it to Borla and ask them to replicate an exhaust for the new 350 that sounds as close to the vintage 350 as possible.
Well, I'm a friend and admirer of Alex Borla.
What's inside this bad boy? This is where it's all happened.
In my opinion, he puts out the best exhaust systems.
When Carroll Shelby is asking for a particular sound, with no disrespect to anybody else, it's a big deal. Carroll Shelby knows what he wants. He knows what it's supposed to sound like. I think that one of the things that needs to be acknowledged here is just the general difference between a modern engine and a classic engine. You're talking about older cars having lower compression and lower RPMs and pushrod engines. All those things can affect the sound. An exhaust system doesn't create sound because we're working with the engine and we're shaping the sound that comes out of the engine. So we are limited to a certain extent. Carroll Shelby understands that as well. You know, he's never going to walk in and really expect it to sound like one of his classic cars. What he wants is the spirit of it. He wants it to elicit a similar emotion that old sound did. And so our job is to take this different engine and this modern thing, fully knowing that if you lined up that car next to a classic Mustang, just about everybody's going to be able to tell the difference. But how do we make the guy feel the same way? Being able to tune a muffler, give the right sound, is a real trick. It's very difficult to do.
Just like an organ is tuned by different size of pipes and lengths of pipes, we basically have the same options when we tune an exhaust system. And the diameters of the pipe, the material that we use, the design of the muffler internally, as a combination, make up a musical instrument, which is an exhaust system.
Just like its exhaust note, every detail of the new GT350 was continually refined until Carroll and the Shelby team were finally satisfied. Upon completion of the new GT350, Shelby decided to do some real-world testing out on the track. To see if the new GT350 could run with the big dogs, he invited a few of the world's fastest production cars to lay down their best time at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway's interior road course. Originally introduced in 1963, the 911 has been improved upon every year of its existence. Today, it is known the world over as one of the finest all-round sports cars ever created. Robert Borum has been a club racer for 10 years and today brought out his 997 Turbo. This Porsche sports a 493 horsepower twin-turbo flat six, powers the car from a standstill to 60 miles an hour in just 3.2 seconds and a top speed of just over 200 miles per hour. It also features a computer-controlled all-wheel drive system that varies the amount of torque that goes to each wheel to prevent any loss of traction. On today's road course, the Force put out an impressive time of 1 minute, 0.92 seconds with a top speed of 117, putting it ahead of the Ferrari just behind the Z06. Coming up, we'll finally see how the new GT350 fares against some of the most famous sports cars in the world. After building the new Mustang GT350, Carroll Shelby has laid down an ambitious challenge to his engineers. He invited 4 high-performance cars to the Las Vegas Motor Speedway to lay down their best lap times, and then he'll run the GT350 to see how it stacks up. Kareem Hussein is an instructor at Exotics Racing and brought their Lamborghini Gallardo LP560. It's a hand-built car that screams aggression with its fighter jet styling and 560 horsepower V10. It puts 470 foot-pounds of torque to the ground through a computer-controlled all-wheel drive system and screams through the quarter mile at just over 11 seconds. In today's race, the Gallardo was fast, putting down a time of just over a minute and a top speed of 115. Coming up, we'll see how the GT350 fares against the competition, but this won't be the first time for the GT350 on the track. Long before today, Shelby brought the first prototype to Michigan to show Ford what he had created.
The 350 was tested by Ford test drivers and run on the track.
We spent a lot of time testing, and we have multiple dynamometers. We have probably 6 wind tunnels. We do a considerable amount of testing. We have to.
You have the Shelby team, the Ford Racing team, the base Mustang team, you have the Ford Racing actual race teams, all came together on the test track to develop the supercharged GT350. The neat part about it is it's all of the same type of people that Carroll would have hung around with in the 60s.
There's enthusiasm, there's loyalty, they're a great group of people.
Go out and we test it, and we develop it, and we break stuff. And when we break it, we fix it.
We were in there pulling the cars into the garages, swapping parts out, swapping calibrations, changing brakes, wheels, and tires, and getting back out on the track again.
We have a car that the people expect to be able to push hard and be able to be durable, and it's extremely important to Mustang that we test it until we can't test it anymore.
They're great cars. They're at the top of their class, and we're continually trying to make the Mustang better.
Funny because the drivers from Ford came back and said, "You guys have knocked it out of the park with this vehicle."
Shelby was so pleased with the 2011 GT350, he decided to repeat history and create a convertible for the second-year run just like he did in 1966. Though he only built 4 drop-top GT350s in 66, today's number will be based solely on demand.
We've got customer feedback, like, geez, great car. Why don't you guys do a convertible? At least offer the option to do a convertible. So now you got a choice for both.
And I drove a convertible the other day, and it's the tightest convertible I ever drove in my life.
As nice as it is to drive with the top down, Gary will be using a GT350 coupe in today's time attack. There are 3 different 50-state legal GT350 coupes available. Stage 1 is a handling and appearance package. Stage 2 takes that same package and bumps the power up with a supercharger to 525 horsepower. Stage 3 kicks it up another notch to 624 horsepower, which is what Gary will be driving today. The team is seeing how fast the competitors are, and now it's finally time to take the GT350 to the Las Vegas Motor Speedway to see what it can do in today's time attack. The GT350 Gary is driving has 624 horsepower and goes 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds and tears down the quarter mile in 12 seconds flat. It can pull an impressive 1.05 G on the skid pad, putting it square in supercar territory.
An enthusiast is going to love this car because it's so well balanced. And it's got a sound, it's just to die for. Actually, we still have the air conditioning on because it's a little bit warm outside. And when you think about it, you think that the car will perform at this level. It is pretty dang remarkable. So here, I'm just going to balance it through this corner, let it drift, get the weight back on the back tires, where I can get the maximum straightaway speed.
The GT350 lived up to its name and its race pedigree by laying down an untouchable 56-second lap, putting the new car in a category that is way outside its price range. When run up against over $500,000 worth of exotic cars, it managed to beat them all and still drive home. At the end of the day, Carroll Shelby proves that his championship DNA is just as potent in the 21st century as it was in the last. He placed a tall order when he stacked the new GT350 up against a field of high-dollar exotic sports cars, but his little pony car didn't just hold its own, it set the bar. With the fastest time of the day, the new GT350 proves it's not just the fastest Mustang, it's the king of the road.